Look at that smile. You've seen it thousands of times. On your TV, in your living room, maybe on a sick day when you stayed home from school. Maybe on a slow afternoon when you had nothing better to do than watch someone win a car. That smile became one of the most recognizable things in American television. But here's what nobody watching ever knew. The man behind that smile had already tried to end his life, twice, before most of us ever heard his name. And in early 2025, after decades of keeping his darkest moments tucked behind the jokes, the game show, and the glasses, Drew Carey finally started talking. What came out wasn't a PR moment. It wasn't a book tour confession timed to boost sales. It was something rawer than that. The kind of honesty that only comes when a person has been through so much that holding it in starts to cost more than letting it go. This is the real story of Drew Carey. And it's nothing like what you think you know. Drew Carey was born in Cleveland, Ohio in 1958. Working-class neighborhood. Regular house. Nothing about his early life hinted at where he'd end up. But when he was 8 years old, his father died of a brain tumor. 8 years old. Drew later said something about that loss that never really leaves you once you hear it. He said he could barely remember his father without the sickness, which means the version of his dad he carries in his memory is already fading, already ill, already leaving. That kind of grief doesn't just hurt once, it follows you. His mother raised 3 boys alone after that. Money was tight, the emotional weight was heavy. And somewhere in those years, a quiet, heavy sadness settled into Drew that he couldn't shake. Not as a teenager, not as a young adult, not even when success eventually came knocking. By the time he was 18, that sadness had reached a breaking point. He attempted suicide for the first time. He later described a memory from around that age, being at a party, surrounded by people laughing and carrying on, and feeling completely hollow. Like everyone else had been handed something he never got. Like happiness was a language everyone else then spoke fluently and he just couldn't. He tried again in his early 20s. 2 attempts. Before anyone knew his name. Before the sitcom, the game show, the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Any of it. He also revealed in his memoir that he had been sexually abused by a family member as a child. He carried that in silence for years. The book became a New York Times bestseller, but honestly, the number of copies it sold matters far less than the fact that he finally said it out loud. This is who Drew Carey was before the world knew who Drew Carey was. In 1980, at 22 years old, Drew Carey enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve. And before you skip past that detail, don't. Because for a young man who had spent years feeling like he had no footing, no direction, no real sense of who he was, the Marines gave him something none of his earlier life had: structure, discipline, a reason to show up. He served until 1986, reached the rank of sergeant, worked as a field radio operator. It wasn't a glamorous chapter, and he's the first to admit he was just in the reserves. But that period quietly rebuilt something in him that depression and loss had worn down. It also gave him time. And in that time, something unexpected started growing. He began writing jokes. Not performing yet, just writing. He started crafting material for a Cleveland radio DJ named David Lawrence, who actually paid him for it and encouraged him to keep going. Drew studied joke books. He worked on his own voice. He entered an open mic contest and won. By 1986, he was the MC at the Cleveland Comedy Club. None of this was an overnight leap. It was slow, deliberate, piece by piece. The kind of progress that only happens when someone is fighting for it, not just waiting for it. The year 1991 changed everything. Drew appeared on HBO's Young Comedian special. Then, in November of that year, he got a spot on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. The set went well, like really well. Carson invited him to sit on the couch afterward. If you don't know what that means in comedy terms, it was basically Carson handing you a golden ticket. A public endorsement from the man who had launched more careers than anyone in late-night history. After that, Hollywood stopped treating Drew Carey like a guy trying to break in. He had broken in. By 1995, he co-created The Drew Carey Show, a semi-autobiographical sitcom set in Cleveland that ran for 9 seasons and 233 episodes on ABC. He wasn't just the face of it. He co-created it, executive produced it, and wrote episodes himself. The industry started recognizing that he wasn't just talented in front of a camera, he could build things. Around the same time, he took on Whose Line Is It Anyway?, hosting and producing the American version for 219 episodes and essentially becoming the face of improv comedy on television for an entire generation. 2 major franchises, 1 man, running simultaneously. By 2003, he had a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. The distance between a suicidal teenager in Cleveland and a star on Hollywood Boulevard is almost too wide to measure. But he crossed it anyway. In July 2007, Drew Carey was handed what might be the most pressure-filled job in daytime television. Replace Bob Barker on The Price is Right. Barker had hosted the show for 35 years. For millions of viewers, he was the show. The idea of someone else standing in that spot felt almost offensive to people who had grown up watching it. The criticism came fast. The comparisons were instant. Longtime fans were skeptical, and some were openly hostile. Drew walked into that job anyway. And here's the thing. Hosting The Price is Right is genuinely hard. It's not just smiling and reading prizes off a card. You're managing energy, timing, suspense, dozens of moving parts, and a live studio audience every single day. You have to know every game. You have to be fully on, constantly. Drew learned every game. He stayed. Year after year, he stayed. By 2025, he had hosted the show for over 17 years. He didn't just survive the transition, he became the transition. In one interview, when asked about retirement, he gave an answer that told you everything about how much the job means to him now. He said, "I want to die on stage." For a man who once wanted to die altogether, that sentence carries a weight most people in that audience never felt. Even as the career was thriving, life kept delivering. In 2010, Drew was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. A doctor told him plainly, "Change your habits now, or your life gets shorter." He responded by losing around 80 pounds, no carbs, daily cardio. He went from a size 44 to a size 33. He eventually came off his diabetes medication entirely. But what he said about how he got through it matters more than the weight loss itself. He talked about self-help books, Wayne Dyer, Zig Ziglar, Og Mandino, becoming almost daily companions. He was rebuilding himself mentally at the same time he was rebuilding himself physically, not as a trend, as survival. Then in 2017, he met Amy Hargreaves Harwick at a Hollywood party. He was 58. She was 35. Within weeks, he was telling people at work that if things kept going the way they were going, he was going to marry her. Their first date was at Disneyland. He fell fast and fully. For a man who had spent so much of his life wrestling with emptiness, this felt different. She was a licensed family and marriage therapist, an author, a woman who talked openly about mental health in a way that probably meant more to Drew than it did to most. By January 2018, they were engaged. She appeared on a Valentine's Day episode of The Price is Right. Millions of viewers watched him introduce her on national television. The engagement ended later that year. No public drama, just quietly over. But the feelings, clearly, were not. On February 13th, 2020, Valentine's Day Eve, Amy texted Drew. She said she had been thinking about forgiveness, that she'd love to meet and talk. He wrote back that he would love that too. Then he added 3 words, "I love you." 2 days later, on February 15th, 2020, Amy Harwick was found beneath the balcony of her Hollywood Hills home. She had been strangled. She was 38 years old. She died at the hospital a short time later. Her ex-boyfriend, a man she had previously filed restraining orders against, a man she had told friends she was afraid of, was arrested 14 hours after her death. In September 2023, after years of legal proceedings, he was convicted of first-degree murder. In December 2023, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When Drew spoke publicly after her death, he didn't sound like a television host. He sounded like a man who had lost something he didn't know how to live without. He described their love as the kind people are lucky to experience once in a lifetime. He later said that even before her murder, the breakup had felt like a death. After she was gone, there was no word left for what it felt like. Drew Carey's life doesn't fit in a single category. Marine, comedian, sitcom star, game show host, author, soccer team co-owner, WWE Hall of Famer, grief survivor. But underneath every one of those titles is the same person. A kid from Cleveland who felt invisible, who hit rock bottom more than once, who lost people he loved in ways no one should ever have to experience, and who kept finding new ways to stay. That is the real story. Not the prizes, not the ratings, not the Hollywood star. Just a man who figured out, slowly and painfully, that the best reason to keep going is simply to keep going. And if there's anyone out there watching this who's fighting their own version of that battle right now, Drew Carey, of all people, is proof that the next chapter can look completely unrecognizable from where you're standing today. Subscribe. Drop a comment. What did you not know about Drew Carey before this?